Good morning. My name is Susie, and I'll be reading from the book of Exodus, chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. Moses was taking care of the flock for his father-in-law Jethro, Midian's priest. He led his flock out to the edge of the desert, and he came to God's mountain called Horeb. The Lord's messenger appeared to him in a flame of fire in the middle of a bush. Moses saw that the bush was in flames, but it didn't burn up. Then Moses said to himself, "Let me check out this amazing sight and find out why the bush isn't burning up." When the Lord saw that he was coming to look, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." Moses said, "I'm here." Then the Lord said, "Don't come any closer. Take off your sandals, because you are standing on holy ground." He continued, "I am the God of your father, Abraham's God, Isaac's God, and Jacob's God." Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, "I've clearly seen my people oppressed in Egypt. I've heard their cry of injustice because of their slave masters. I know about their pain. I've come down to rescue them from the Egyptians in order to take them out of that land and bring them to a good and broad land, a land that's full of milk and honey, a place where the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites all live. Now the Israelites' cries of injustice have reached me. I've seen just how much the Egyptians have oppressed them. So get going. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I to go to Pharaoh and to bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" God said, "I'll be with you, and this will show you that I'm the one who sent you. After you bring the people out of Egypt, you will come back here and worship God on this mountain."
Which one of you put new? I knew it was you. So, for those of you who haven't looked at it yet, the reason why that's profound is it's not like NEW, like, look, I am doing a new thing. It's GNU, like the bird. I love it. That's exactly the kind of thing I was thinking would happen. So I want to first say thank you to everybody who has been praying for my mother. A couple of weeks ago, she had open heart surgery. She's had a history of cardiac problems for probably since the 80s. And each one basically gets to the point where the doctors say, this is as much as we can do without doing open heart surgery, which we don't want to do. And then there'll be another problem, and this is as much as we can do without open heart surgery. So it finally got to the point where there was no more that they could do, and so they went in there and they did 6 different surgeries and just basically did everything. And her health was already kind of precarious. And so this was a very nerve-wracking time for us, and recovery's been slow. It's been full of unexpected problems and issues, but she's moved forward, she's progressing. She called me yesterday, the first time I've actually talked to her in several weeks because she's had tubes down her throat, and had a lovely conversation. Should be moving into rehab on Tuesday. So I appreciate all of your prayers, all of your thoughts, all of your concerns. I appreciate the people who have just randomly reached out throughout the week to see how she was. And so in honor of her progressing, I'd like to tell you my favorite story about my mother. It was the early 2000s, and I was in high school. And it was after school, when I was sitting at the table doing probably some kind of math homework. And my dad was cooking dinner, as he normally did. It's like 5:30 or so. And we hear my mom's car come home. She was a nurse. She worked in Philly. She worked late. And I heard her coming up. She opened the door, slammed the door behind her. Like, she was angry. And my mom's not a person who shows a lot of emotion, but she was very upset by what was happening. And she stormed up the stairs. And she said, "Can you believe the gall, the audacity of the borough to put a speed limit sign in our front yard without consulting us? How dare they? That is our private property. They do not have the right." And she's going on about this for I don't know how long, until my dad interrupted her and said, "Jer, the speed limit sign, the 25-mile-per-hour speed limit sign at the front of our property?" And she's like, "Yeah, how dare they put that there?" And he was like, "That was there when we built the house 15 years ago. You have driven by that sign for 15 years and have only now noticed that it is there in front of your house." I love it. She would always say that she's got the head of a hamster. That's her phrase. That is my phrase as well. We tend to see, we're too busy contemplating the mysteries of the universe that we miss the speed limit sign in the beginning of our yard. I don't know if you can relate to that at all. Some of you may be there with me as well. You have like walked into parking meters because you're too busy, lost in conversation. You just bump into something, right? That might be you. That's definitely me. And I think that is also Moses. Okay? I love this story, and not just because it's this weird story about a bush that burns and is not consumed, and it's all magical and mystical and whatnot. But some time ago, I was talking about this passage with one of my dear friends who's a rabbi, and she said, well, you know that the ancient rabbis have a teaching about this. I go, "Oh, of course they do. They have a teaching about everything." She said, "Yeah, the bush had been burning for a long time. The bush had been burning for days, maybe weeks. Some rabbis say it was burning for months before Moses turned to look at it. Because if you look at the text, it says that Moses noticed that there was a bush that was burning and yet was not consumed. Have you ever walked past something that's on fire? Like a bonfire or a campfire or something. Have you ever stopped to watch it long enough to see whether or not the wood inside was burning up? You'd have to stop for a long time, or you'd have to walk past the same thing a whole bunch of times, right? So the rabbis read this passage and they said, Moses walked past this burning bush and he didn't notice it. Moses was too concerned with the sheep that he was herding. Because you have to remember a little bit of backstory. Moses is a fugitive at this point. He had killed a man in Egypt and had run for his life away from Pharaoh's police force and was out in the wilderness. He got married. He's working as a shepherd. He's trying to hide his identity. He's just focused on the here and now and not where he's from and not where he's going. He's focused on right now. He's tending sheep in the wilderness. So the rabbis would say he walked past the burning bush. Days, it's burning. And then one day he notices that it's burning. But that's not that uncommon. It's a wilderness. It's dry. Things happen. And then he walks past it again the next day and notices that it's still burning and thinks to himself that it's a different bush that was burning. And how many times does he walk past it before he notices that it's the same bush and then turns from his path? There's like three parts to that, right? There's him missing it because he's busy working on what he's doing. There's him noticing it out of the peripheral. And then there's him making the peripheral his central vision and moving towards it. The miracle of this passage is not in the fact that there's a bush with fire in it that's not consumed. The miracle is in the noticing of it. And you notice, too, when he approaches it, there's a voice that comes from it. Like God is not speaking until Moses is paying attention. And the voice says, "Take off your shoes, for you are on holy ground." Now, I love that detail. Because Moses has been walking past this bush for weeks with his shoes on. He has been trampling on holy ground for weeks with his shoes on. He didn't realize that he was standing on holy ground until the voice in the bush pointed it out to him, until he stopped and noticed that this patch of wilderness that was just a normal, average, everyday patch of nothingness was in fact holy ground. Which then, of course, I would ask, is there a patch that is not holy ground? I'm not sure there is. I think we could notice any particular patch of ground and say, my goodness, this ground is holy ground. This is sacred space where I am right now. Now, I don't want to stand up here right now and tell you that because you all are so busy, that you are so consumed with your job and your family and your television and your social networks, that you're missing God and you need to stop whatever you're doing and you need to focus on God because you're missing the point. I'm not going to be that guy because, let's be serious, pot and kettle, all of that. But also, not noticing things is a gift. That is how your brain has evolved. You are not supposed to notice everything. If your brain processed every bit of information that came to it, you would die. You would burn so many calories that your brain would fry, like literally it would overheat. You are not meant to notice everything. Okay? There's this thing in neuroscience called latent inhibition. Latent inhibition. This is basically your brain's ability to block things out. Okay? You don't know what's in your peripheral vision until you start thinking about it, right? You're all thinking about it right now, and now you can see Hugo out of the corner of your eye, but you didn't see him before. You're not thinking about your breathing, but now you are. Now, I'm so sorry for those of you that I've now ruined the rest of your day, because now you can only think about your breathing. But you cannot process every little bit of information right now. Your brain cannot handle it. The ability to miss things is a gift given to you. Now, people who have low latent inhibition, like they can't block things out, they notice a lot of things. There is a direct correlation between that and genius, by the way. The people who can't stop seeing everything also see connections between things. They notice things normal people don't. They tend to be brilliant. There is a literal connection. There have been studies about this between genius and low latent inhibition. But the flip side of that, of course, is that as you get older, your brain stops working as well, but you still keep taking in all the information that you used to take in, except now you can't handle it. And so there is also a link between low latent inhibition and madness. So, we have a lot to look forward to, right? I think it was Socrates or Plato. One of them said there is no genius without a hint of madness. And that's what's happening. You're just somebody who notices too much, right? There are some of us who don't notice anything, and we're oblivious, and we walk through life bumping into trees and stuff. And then there are those of us who cannot take a walk without noticing every single specific type of bird, Candy, that is happening all around us. Right? When we take our prayer walks, I feel like we'll be like mid-conversation, and she'll be like, Kingfisher, where are you? And then we'll stop and we'll notice. And that is a gift to those of us who tend to get lost in clouds of thought, because you bring us to the here and now, to what we're noticing. But I can also tell that that is probably feels like a curse sometimes to you, right? Yeah. I believe it. I absolutely believe it. So I'm not going to stand up here and tell you that if you don't notice the divine in every inch of the cosmos, that there is something wrong with you, that you are somehow less spiritual and you need to be better, because we have evolved to ignore things. And that is a blessing. That is a gift. That is a way to stay sane. But we also need to be aware that sometimes we do filter out the divine. The sacred gets filtered out as well as just the stuff in our periphery. The burning bushes stay burning in the distance, and we don't take notice of it because we're focused on the sheep. So I want to make sure I'm clear about that. You are not broken because you sometimes miss divine encounters, because you miss the Spirit in the mundane. There's nothing wrong with you. You are not inherently less spiritual or less holy or less good. But the Spirit does not often shout. The Spirit does shout sometimes. I have an experience, and I'll tell you some other time, where I really felt like the Spirit was calling me to something, and I was saying, nah, I'm not really into that. That sounds like not very fun. And I put it off, and I put it off, and I put it off, and then one day the Spirit like kicked me through the open door that she had opened like a year earlier, and I felt like, okay, we're doing this thing. And that happens once or twice in my life. But for the most part, the Spirit whispers and waits and just is still off in my periphery, just waiting for me to take a moment to notice. It's not going to barge in. She's not going to demand your attention. She's going to be there saying, I'm ready when you are. So I think the call to us today, and the call to us from this story, is not to find God, but to make space to notice God. Not to search and to seek and to find like we're hunting God, but to create an environment where we can notice God's presence. And it's very important that we don't think about this like a hunt, and that we don't think about this as like something that we get better at, finding God, like God is an Easter egg hunt. And if we do this the right way, we set aside time, we're going to find God every time. Because God doesn't work that way. The goal of seeking God is not to win or to have a profound spiritual experience every time you set out to have one, but to just simply become the kind of person who keeps watch, who makes space for opportunity. Now, I've spent a lot of time this week thinking about the ways that I miss the Spirit in my midst and what I can do to notice the various burning bushes. And it occurs to me that what works for me will most likely not work for you, because my hang-ups are not your hang-ups, and your hang-ups are not my hang-ups. Our lives are completely different, and our brains work in very different ways. So I feel like if I were to give you, like, here are 10 things you can try, probably wouldn't work. We all have our own routines, our own ruts that rob us of our peripheral spiritual vision. And the way that we break those, I think, is as unique as we are. But even if and when you do settle into routines of sacred pause, you are never guaranteed to meet God in a way that makes sense to you. It is terribly inefficient, this whole spiritual stuff. But I feel like the truest and most natural things in life often are. Like, you might set aside 30 minutes of prayer in a dark room. You might light your frankincense and put on your binaural beats or your Enya or whatever it is that gets you in the spiritual mood, and sit down and have no thoughts and meditate perfectly and purely as you've been practicing for 50 years and might hear nothing. And then an hour later, while pulling weeds, you might hear the song of a robin and be inexplicably filled with the joy and love of God. Prayer is not something to force. It is something to catch in the micro moments when the divine might flicker. And like in so many other places, fortune favors the prepared. Fortune favors the prepared. Divine encounters are more recognizable in the mundane moments once you have also taken time to intentionally create a space for God in the other moments as well. I really like what the early church father Origen taught, that prayer is not the act of speaking to God, but is the act of God speaking in us. Prayer is not something that you summon on your schedule, something that you do and perform. It is something that happens to you when you make space for it. It's not words, it's not striving, it's yielding. It's not striving, it is yielding. It is recognizing that Moses was always on holy ground. And the only thing that changed was his awareness of it and his willingness to notice. So I wonder about you in this time, in this place, in this crazy world that we live in. What do you feel stirring up in you? Or where do you feel conviction? Where do you feel that God, you have found God in strange places? How has God spoken to you? How have you taken time to notice God? Or have you? Or are you feeling a drought of sorts? What is stirring up in your spirit as we think about these things?